Hello, Blake Rudis here with F64 Academy and F64 Elite, and today I want to share with you a really cool tutorial on how to use the blend modes that you've probably never used because they're useless without this trick that I'm going to show you, and that's the color burn and color dodge blend modes. When you use these successfully with one another, you can dodge and burn while color grading at the exact same time. It doesn't just work on landscapes, it also works on portraits. I've got a set of actions for you to download, but before you do that, let's learn how this works. So here's our overall before, and here's our after. Very subtle, but very beautiful color grading, very quickly and very easily using two blend modes. Let's go ahead and jump in. In today's tutorial, we're going to talk about two very unique blend modes that you've probably never used because when you turned them on, you were like, that looks like crap. And then you maybe even dropped the opacity and said, nope, still looks like crap. And then you never use them again. And that's because these two specific blend modes, color burn and color dodge, require you to use a very specific tool in order to make them work. Now, before you go ahead and download the actions that I've got provided for you, I need you to pay attention. So don't download those actions now. You'll get in trouble. You'll get a slap on the wrist. You'll go to the principal's office and, well, no, that's actually not going to happen. But the idea is I need you to understand why these blend modes do what they do and why they're working the way they do on your image before you just go ahead and start pressing play on the actions. So I'm going to show you this on a landscape, and then I'm going to use the actions that I've created for you on a portrait to show you that you can be used for anything. Color grading is something that is just so unique that you need to do with every one of your photographs. It doesn't matter if you're a portrait photographer, landscape photographer, color grading is what makes you the artist and putting your mood and your feeling into the image to allow the viewer to see it. So let's go ahead and get into this. I'm going to do something that we would not normally do. I'm going to go down here to solid color, and I'm going to fill this with a magenta color. Yep, let's just go 255 on the red, 255 on the blue, and make this magenta. And the reason why I'm using magenta is not necessarily because that's a color that I like to color grade with, but because it allows you to really see what's happening to the image with this magenta color. So let's go ahead and go into the first one, which is going to be color burn. Now, if you're looking at these categories of blend modes, these are all blend modes that will darken your image in some way, shape, or form using the data that you've provided. These will lighten your image in some way, shape, or form using the data you provided. Well, the data we provided here is a magenta layer. So when I press color burn, it makes the whole image look really deep and kind of like a violent magenta color. Well, if you've ever come down here to opacity and tried to drop this, it doesn't seem to really do much, right? Well, that's where the unique thing comes in with fill. This is one of those blend modes. There are 8 blend modes, and this is one of them that uses fill to control how it operates on your image. So when we look at this now, that magenta is going all over our photograph. It's going over our highlights, our shadows, and our midtones. But watch what happens when I click on the fill and I start to slowly bring this down. Look at how the highlights start to come through. So if I'm color burning this image with magenta and I bring the fill down to something like 50%, what happens is it's not allowing this magenta to apply itself to the deepest highlight areas in the image. It's transitioning right now into the darkest darks and into my midtones. So if I bring this down even a little bit further, you can see that now we're starting to protect those midtone areas, and now we're really only applying this magenta color to our shadows. So if we bring this between 15 and 20%, we have now successfully color graded our shadows with a magenta color. Now, it doesn't stop there. What we need to do is we need to look at what's happening to the image, because when we turn this on and off, it's making the dark areas of our image even darker. So we need to protect those a little bit more. And to do that, I'm going to double click on this and I'm going to move the blend if settings over here, because these areas right here are going to protect our underlying layers, either shadows or highlights, from the effect that we have going. So if I move this shadow area over, you start to see how our shadow areas underneath the magenta start to lift through that magenta color, right? So now if I press Alt or Option and feather this over, we can now feather that magenta color. We definitely want magenta to be applied to our dark areas, right? But we don't want it to be so overpowering that it's just really thick down there. So if we press Alt or Option and feather this over, it's now very subtly applying itself to our shadows, transitioning into our midtones. Whereas this blend mode with fill set to 15% is transitioning it from the midtones into the shadows. So you see we're meeting ourselves in the middle here with this. If you want to further control this, you can come up to the opacity and set this to something like 50%. I use the color magenta for that, just for display purposes. Now, if I double click on this, I can change this color to whatever color I want. So here is where I start controlling the mood of this image. I can make it really moody by adding a blue to it. Look at how much more moody this image is. Or I could come into something like red and make it a little bit more uplifting, or even in the yellows and make it even more bright and kind of more like an area that you might want to go to, okay? But if I make it blue, it really matches that kind of cold feeling that we have in Olympic National Park, which I love the way this looks, but I want you to experiment with this. This is essentially our color burn. I'll even use green and press OK. So I'll double click on here and call this color burn. We're burning this area with color, and we did it with the color green at this point. Turn this off. Turn it on, you can see a very subtle application of color. If you want to control this, you can either use the fill or the opacity. Now know that the fill is going to make it more green throughout the entire image and allow it to spread outside of those midtones and more towards the highlights. The difference between fill and opacity is that opacity is going to say how much green applies itself to the areas that you're selecting with the fill. So they work hand in hand. If I put this at 50% at 15% fill, that is the perfect starting point for this color grade. So now let's do the exact same thing. Let's go down here to our solid color. We're going to fill this with magenta again. Again, straight up 255 red, 255 blue, magenta. Press OK. And we're going to change this one to color dodge. Again, these are the areas that are going to lighten up our image. So now I'll rename this color dodge. And this is the exact opposite of what we saw before. Remember in the color burn, our highlight areas were really magenta and our deep dark areas weren't quite as much. Well, now if we change the fill here and move this fill down, you're going to see how it starts to transition and it protects our shadow areas from this magenta and only allows it to apply itself to the highest highlights towards the midtones. Now, this is another one of those things where let's just change this to 15%. This is another one of those things where it applies itself really harsh to our highlight areas. If we look back here, we have some blowouts back there, okay? So if I double click on this, we're going to use blend if, but we're going to go to the opposite side of blend if, and we're going to say, okay, I need the highlight areas of this to be protected and move towards my midtones. So I'll press Alt or Option and feather this over to about right here. And now we have a really good application of magenta on the image. And this is going to color grade our highlights with a magenta color. If we turn on the green, the thing about this is I've got green and magenta selected. And that wasn't necessarily by accident. Yes, I was showing you how this works with the color magenta. But what I usually do is I use color theory to decide what colors I want to put on my image. So you might be thinking, well, that's great, Blake, but what color combinations are the best? Well, if you think about it, use the color wheel to create harmony in your image. So if I double click this, and change this to something like a creamish or yellow color, so something like maybe right in here, and press OK, and then double click the color burn and change this to a cyan or bluish color, those are opposites on the color wheel. So they're going to create a sense of harmony in this image and work very well together. I can even reverse these. I can double click on this cream and say I want this to be blue in the highlight areas, and then double click on the blue and say I want this to be cream in those darker areas, okay? And lighten it up. So we had blue on the background, blue on the highlights, and now cream on the shadows. So whatever you're looking at here, the color burn is for your shadows, the color dodge is for your highlights. And if you look at this color grade, it's very subtle. And that's typically because the best colors to use for color burning are going to be darker colors because it's going to add a nice dark color cast to your shadow areas. And your highlights are usually better suited with things like the creamish colors or the lightish colors. But on that note, if we double click inside this color burn, watch what happens when we use a light color. You see here when we use a light color, we're lightening up those shadows, whereas if we use a dark color, we're deepening the contrast in those shadows. So the color that you choose is going to play a big role in your end result. So if we use something like this dark kind of cream color here, and then we increase this fill, you see we have a little bit more control over where the yellowish areas are going to apply to our image. And again, the opacity, we bring that up to 100%, we now have a really deep one. So the best option here is usually 50% opacity, 15% color fill, and modify accordingly, but don't go too much higher. So if you're wondering how this is going to work on portraits, I've got a really great one here from Adobe Stock that's got a lot of really neutral colors in it. So it's going to allow me to use this color dodge and burn in a really unique way on this photograph. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the actions here, And right here you see Color Dodge and Burn from Blake Rudis. This is one that I'm allowing you to download. All you have to do is double click on that ATN file and it will open up right in your actions. I'm going to go ahead and press play on this blue and cream. So you'll see that what it gives you is the color dodge, just like I talked about in this tutorial, and the color burn with the color blue. So this is a cream and blue combination, and notice how all these combinations work in harmony with the color wheel with complementary colors. Magenta and green, okay, and cyan and red. So we're going to have a red burn and a cyan dodge. Now, if you're wondering, do you have to keep these color patterns? No, you don't. You can use whatever colors you want. So if you like this cyan color, but you want your maybe the background to be more of a deep cyan type of, or blue, or even a purple, whatever you want that to be, you can change these colors just by double clicking inside this color fill layer and experimenting with the colors that you want to apply to this image. Notice how if I use a red, especially in the color dodge, it really brings out skin tones beautifully. So if we click on this purple, because now I don't like that purple, we can change this to maybe a deeper blue, and we have a really nice color grade. Very simple, very easy, color grading, color dodging, and color burning, both at the exact same time. So we're accomplishing two tasks at the exact same time. We're dodging and burning, and we're adding color, so we're getting a really nice color graded combination with these two blend modes. So just to recap and review, the whole idea behind this is using the fill for the color dodge and the color burn blend modes. Otherwise, they're practically useless. So when I use the fill in conjunction with opacity and blend if, we can get a really beautiful application of color grading on our image while we dodge and burn at the exact same time. So again, my name is Blake Rudis. If you like this, please comment on it, share it, tell a friend, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you haven't done this yet, go to the link that's either in this card on YouTube, in the description, or on the website, F64 Academy, or on Facebook. There's going to be a link somewhere that you can click and download the actions that I'm providing for you with this tutorial. I certainly hope you enjoyed it, and I really hope it helps you with your photographic workflow.